address that if you'd like.
That'd be good. All right, and so nobody had anything on, oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Carson.
Just as an update, board members, when I went back and looked at policy BCBI. I went and pulled the policies from Metro, Shelby, Hamilton, Sevier County. There's one more. And as we all kind of work through TSBA, they're all amazingly the same. And they all have the same policy. They have some tweaks on it. There's some where you're allowed to speak only 3 minutes, or there is a 30-minute cap on public forum. So it's kind of like a first come, first serve kind of thing. And I'm not at all advocating that we move to that. The only thing that I did notice as I had some communication back and forth with some teachers, history-wise, probably 8. I know when I started on the board in 2004, the only time you had public forum was on the Wednesday voting meeting. And then we added it in on the one workshop, and then we added it in on all of our workshops over the years in an effort just to be able to have more opportunities for input from all of our citizens. So when we did that, we decided that on the 2 workshops, you had to speak towards anything that was on the agenda. And that if you wanted to speak about things that were not on bring up the off topic that the board may not be aware of, that was the Wednesday voting meeting. Mm-hmm. So that's not really clear in here. The way everything is worded, it sounds like at any point, if it's going to be off the agenda, it'll be at the end of the thing. And that's the discrepancy in here. I am very comfortable with keeping it where on workshops we continue to have a public forum, but we keep it to agenda items only. So I don't know if that's a clarification that we need to put in somewhere. I would assume somewhere around line, and I don't know that it even has happened for Wednesday, but somewhere around 22, 23, somewhere in there, public comments directly related to an agenda item may only be, made at work sessions. Mm-hmm. And I think that would then cover some of the changes that the board has made that haven't. In addressing the other issue of teacher and employee concerns coming before the board without going through an appropriate chain of command, which is the reason I brought this up. In talking to these other ones, that's their understanding of the policies they too have in place. What I want ultimately is to make sure that our system is appropriate and responsive to all employee concerns. And I believe we've not been very good at that. And I believe that's what makes people then say, well, I need to just come bring it before the board. But I also firmly believe that bringing forth concerns about how our public education system is working on TV without documenting attempts to fix those problems at whatever level they need to be addressed is not good for public education. And it takes a whole lot longer. I heard from a number of teachers who said, well, I mentioned one example was in about the SAT-10. I shared with my principal that, my concerns about it. It's not developmentally appropriate, all of the issues. My principal's response was, I agree with you, but that's a central office decision. And so this teacher said, so what do I do? That's why I come to the people who make the decision. In truth, if we are a system that is responsive and appropriate to an employee concern, yes, that first gets addressed at the principal level. The only way that I think that we ever get to where we take the experience, the expertise from our teachers and get that to help with decision making is if we acknowledge their concerns and deal with them. So in that example, what I said and what I firmly believe should happen is the principal, the teacher puts that in writing. You can mention it in a staff meeting, but you follow up in writing. These are my concerns. The principal should respond. And in that example, I would expect a response that says, okay, I will look at that, and I will then bring it up. We'll put it on the agenda for our next grade level meeting just to see if, let's validate it. And then you finish the grade level meeting, you find that every kindergarten teacher has that concern. So then the principal, again, sends a quick email. These are what I understand the concerns. I'm going to bring it to the elementary level principal meeting. And the employee consistently gets feedback, but nobody is powerless at that level to do anything. That's who should be influencing the changes. That is how that expertise moves up the change and influences the decisions that are made. And if that's not happening, or they feel like that can't happen at any level, that's when that needs to be addressed. And we're not forcing the system to respond appropriately to our employees. And until we do, our teachers, our staff level people will never feel like their voice is heard. But I can tell you, when you get up and just speak up here, it's kind of like when a community member sends an email and it's just addressed to me, and they tell me about their concern. I am going to follow through on that. When I see that it went to 20 people, I frequently will assume, well, maybe so-and-so is going to address that. And it never gets addressed. So, I think this policy kind of covers this. And I really have spent time looking at it because I do want our system to respond better and respond appropriately. But it's the same thing. When a parent calls this office and wants to talk about a problem they had at a school, the first thing we do is direct them back. And we give that principal and that teacher an opportunity to address those concerns. And I think we just need to do it. And I think it's time that we just all stop and start doing that appropriately and test the system. And it's going to require training and responses. And we are not going to be perfect, but we'll know where the breakdown is and then can address it in a professional development way, not in a punitive way to say. When you tell your employees, let's say you're, the reading supervisor, you say, well, we can't do anything about it. You got to be able to defend it, not just say that's the rule. That's the rule doesn't work.
I agree. Mr. McMillan, did you have a comment?
I guess more of a question than anything. So where do we go from here? Are we going to adhere to the policy as it was revised in March of 2008, or are we going to?
At this point, nobody's made any amendments to change it, so it is the policy that is in effect.
So if I guess my question would be to you as the chair, if somebody comes up here to speak on a matter, are you going to ask them whether they have talked to the principal? Let's say it's a teacher. Are you going to ask if they've talked to the principal about the matter, or the supervisor, or whoever? Or are we going to allow them to speak?
I think, based on this, I think it is incumbent upon us as a board to make sure that our policies are better known. And so I think if somebody calls to say they want to speak, they always have to tell us what they want to speak about. I think then we direct people to this policy, and if they get up here, then yes, I think that's what I'm going to have to ask them based on what this says. I mean, I do what the board tells me to do, but this policy.
Okay, so basically, I guess what I'm saying, to sort of reiterate what Karen said in reference to the workshops would be reserved for agenda items?
That-
That
Yes.
would be,
That's
but
at our board meeting.
at the actual board meeting, could anybody speak on anything, or would they have had to have gone through some kind of formal process?
Well, right now, anybody speaks, but they have to call in and tell us what they want to speak about. Employees should have to follow our board policy, which, quite frankly, we did not enforce. And so I think all we're saying now is that we should adhere to the policy
Okay, I guess
that has
that's-
been in effect since 2008, and we are now making it public that that is our policy. We're going to follow our policy, and we will coach as we see fit. But I think Ms. Carson's point is very valid in that we have to figure out where the breakdown's occurring. It shouldn't get to the point that somebody feels like they have to come to us because they're not getting their
Well, I don't
questions resolved.
disagree with that. I just, if somebody wants to come and speak before this board, I really think that they should have that opportunity to have 5 minutes to say what they wanted, at least once per month.
Well, as I understand it, as it stands now, on the Wednesday board meeting, people can come speak, and typically, the way I understand our policy, a teacher can come speak about a broad public education issue, but if they've got a particular problem with a policy, like they don't like the SAT 10, or they don't like the evaluation system, is that what you're talking about, Karen, that they need to have then discussed that with their boss and tried to get resolution that way?
And that needs to be documented in writing all the way through. So I guess what I was asking was, are we going to now begin following that and enforcing that policy, which you said we hadn't been enforcing it up to this point. We've just basically been allowing people to speak whatever, if they were present.
I mean, I think, if you, I'll say, I'm sorry, I was wrong. I should have followed this policy all along, because apparently it set a bad precedent that we weren't following our policy. I was trying to do what I thought was in the best interest of the system, but it appears now that in doing that, now it looks like we're taking something away. We're not taking anything away. This is the policy that's always been in place. And so I hate for this to be mischaracterized as we're now stifling something, when in reality we were allowing something that violated our policy. And, that was me as chair, but, when you're sitting here with 40 people signed up to speak, upset, you're not exactly going to tell 40 people, go home. What I think we're trying to do is, in this summer hiatus, get very clear about what public forum is for, what it's not for, and make sure everybody's on the same page as we begin the next school year. I think that's really the intent of this board.
Okay. It also says in there, I read something that I can't find it right at the moment, but it says something about if board members wish to ask questions, does that have to be in writing, or can it be immediate? Since we have that little deal where we don't speak, like county commission, we don't talk to normally.
Well, I think that's another thing. We don't respond as a board right then, but if a board member has a question based on what someone has said in public forum, I believe you can ask them a question.
You could ask it immediately. It wouldn't have to be wait and put it formally in writing or anything.
No.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Ms. Carson.
Yeah, I would just add, Mike, it's not just, the converse is true. I've had a parent who was upset recently and wanted to come talk about that principle in public forum. And I said, that's not our policy. Our policy is that we have an opportunity to address it. And he said to me, Well, your teachers are doing it. Why do you let them do it and not me? And the truth is, I see very little specific issues that are fixed in public forum. And I think there's what is public forum for? I think public forum is a perfect thing for, a parent who brings, we've had parents bring issues about where a bus turns around and picks up somebody, or textbook issues, or even like the kids who had the 4-H issue. But I will tell you what also has been replaced. I don't think it's good, but the board has to decide on that. In the past, in the first probably 8 years that I served on this board, if I had a teacher or a principal who had a concern and I was the board member of that district, they would call me up or write me an email, and we got together and we talked. And what we've taken away is any of that representation because we just talked to the whole board in public forum. And so the opportunities to say, and then I have the opportunity to sit with the superintendent and say, this is what my teachers at this school are telling me about whatever. And so many of those issues can be resolved much more quickly than what I see going on now, and they're not. My ability to put pressure to get an answer, and it's not always the right answer, it's not always the answer the person who has a concern wants or the answer that I want, but to get an answer is much more efficient and effective that way. And the answer has to be defended. And there are going to be times you're not going to like the answer, but at least you get a reason behind it. And you get acknowledgement that you were heard and your concerns are understood. Understood and agreed on are very different things. But I don't find this process currently, I can't imagine that it's really, satisfying for people. Now, the other thing I will say is I do think there are some things in this policy that need to be revised. I don't think, personally, that they need to put it in writing beforehand unless they are going to, So I think there's some antiquated things in this policy, and I think it can be revised, but I think I think I cannot find a business, a company, anything of this side where employees decide the only way their concerns can be heard is to go immediately to the CEO. In a system, a business this big, a system this big, it doesn't work. It's not working now, but it's very clear to me over the months, and I literally am going back and re-listening to every one of those public forums and cataloging the concerns so that I can address, make sure that something's happening. But, what it says to me is our system at the level it is supposed to function is not functioning. Well, you don't fix that by bypassing it. You fix it by fixing it. And if we continue to allow people to bypass it, it will never get fixed. And it will never get solutions. I just believe that, and I can be outvoted, but.
Anything else, Ms. Defford?
In looking at the policy, I guess I have just a couple of questions. Now, we're talking about when teachers are coming to address the board, but when you're talking about going through certain appropriate steps, we're talking about, it says handling of parent citizen complaints. So do we have to be more specific, or do we need to address that as well, that they need to deal with the principal and the supervisor, director, or, because it's not necessarily broken down in this policy for a teacher. On page 242, handling of parent citizen complaints. That's true, but I'm just saying, sometimes if you don't necessarily identify exactly who those individuals are, they sometimes have a tendency to say that does not include me. or they overlook it. That was one observation. And then the other one, it said that if you have questions that's not addressing an item on an agenda, then you can also do that at the end. So that means we have a public forum, especially on Wednesday, for those, and then after that you have a public forum that they can kind of talk about, address issues that are not on the agenda. Right.
That would be our Wednesday board meeting.
Right. And then I see where it said, and I just want us to make sure we're clear, that we as a board can ask questions during public forum, and then if the person addressing the board have to have information, additional information, can ask the director of schools questions. I mean, I'm just looking at what's in here. When we start following the policy, we need to make sure we know exactly what the policy is saying.
Right.
So, and if we don't agree with this, and right now we don't really make comments.
Well,
I'm just saying we just might need to look at it.
yeah, I mean,
As well.
what this brings up is we have a policy.
Right.
Our practice has been different than our policy.
Right.
This is the policy. Do we want to change the policy to match our practices, or do we want to adhere to the policy? If you don't like this policy, then let's make some recommended changes to the policy that this board can look at. Otherwise, this is the policy of the Knox County Board of Education that we will adhere to.
I agree. My question is, I guess we need to look at it.
Right, which is why it's been up here. So if you want to propose changes, all Ms. Carson did was put this on here to start the conversation. She has offered no amendments. At any point in time, a board member can offer an amendment to any policy and ask to bring it before the board. This is not a one-time only. But this is just raising the issue that unless a board member brings changes to the policy, then this is the policy as it stands.
I agree. And
okay?
I'm glad she brought it to our attention because
So everybody
really,
can read
right.
it.
I agree.
Decide if you like it or not. Ms. Kincannon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It would help me to just think through this with a hypothetical. So, let's say there's a group of teachers at a particular school who are not happy with the way PLCs are working. They say they're not too much time, takes away from plan time. Why do we have to do this? And then they talk to their building level administrators and they say we have to do this because everybody has to do it. Maybe the principal's attitude is focus implementation, but not super psyched about it herself. I don't know. That has happened. So then, so I guess what I think the board's interest is to be aware of issues. Like, let's say all the schools in my part of town, the PLCs are going swimmingly and people are happy about it. And another, maybe isolated, maybe widespread, PLCs are not going well. How do we as a board know that? Like, if it goes to the principal and the principal, then they go to the supervisor, and then maybe it's addressed, and that's a win. That's a win for our community. Maybe they make PLCs work better and satisfy the teacher's professional needs for autonomy and time and planning, or maybe not. I just think I don't have a specific revision in mind, but I think it's in the board's interest to be aware of these issues, so maybe, and address them at the lowest level possible. And so if we don't hear about them, we would like to assume that they don't exist. But sometimes there are problems that exist that we also don't hear about that aren't being resolved. And that's what I don't want to I want us to be able to hear about those so we can say, well, PLCs, it seems like it's working great in 80% of our schools, but in 20% it's not. Dr. McIntyre, please fix this and make it a priority. I don't mean to pick on PLCs, although it has been one of the issues that have come up, just teacher time and that sort of thing. So I think that's the board's interest, not to discourage communication, but to encourage, like Karen was saying, addressing it at the building level if possible, and then on up. But somehow that we still hear about it. But I agree. In my time on the board, the most the most effective ways I hear about things is when someone calls me or emails me directly. I'm like, India, we're really struggling here about this issue. And I'll be like, tell me more. And then I learn about it. I'm educated. I know the specifics that might be really true at Belmorris, but not even an issue at Whittle Springs. And usually if you don't hear anything, it probably isn't an issue, or it's like real low on the priorities of concern. So, and then, then I'm like, well, I give some suggestions about how to bring that back or bring it to Dr. McIntyre's attention, and then say, contact me again if things haven't been resolved. And usually that's worked pretty well. Whereas, we've heard a lot of concerns expressed here, and some of them also are state and federal issues. And I think it's been helpful for us to hear people are really frustrated by such and such state mandate. Because then, even though we can't change it unilaterally, we can at least say, our entire professional teaching staff is frustrated by whatever, or a great plurality of them are. So then we can talk, try to communicate with our delegation and with Governor Haslam and so on. So, yeah, I guess I would like to, encourage teachers to continue to contact, to go through the chain of command when things aren't being resolved at the chain of command and they think board members need to know about it. I think contacting board members individually is still a very effective strategy. And public forum, as outlined in our current policy, seems like I don't have any suggested improvements. Has it always been implemented perfectly? Not even when I was board chair. It's not. Don't blame yourself too much. This was a unique year, and it's really.
I didn't want to riot.
Yeah, no, I thought it was handled as well as we could in the time we had, and no one was referring exactly to the letter of the policy at the time. So, anyhow. I don't have anything to change on this, but I do think that following it more closely is not a bad idea, as long as we keep hearing about issues that aren't resolved. That's important.
Well, Mr. McMillan, Mr. Carson both have their down, but what I would say to that, Ms. Kincannon, is that it sounds to me like what I keep hearing over and over is perhaps there needs, we talk about procedures. We talk about our policy and our procedures, and perhaps there's something more in our procedures that ought to be outlined for how people deal with those sort of things. Some companies even have an ombudsman. If you feel like you can't get your thing resolved at the next level, there's a company ombudsman that people can go to. Mr. McMillan, I think you.
I don't have anything specifically to add as a change tonight, but from a procedure standpoint, are we just going to say that since this procedure is in place, there's no reason for us we've discussed it and move on? Are we going to take a reaffirming vote on Wednesday night, or what?
No.
What do you anticipate us doing?
I anticipate doing nothing. This was on here. It is our policy. We don't necessarily need to reaffirm our policy.
Okay.
It's only if we want to change our policy that we need a vote. I think this was my attempt to make sure that we had discussed this, because at our last meeting we said we would. We hadn't heard anything, just wanted to make sure nobody had anything they wanted to add.
Let me ask one other question, and then I'll be quiet.
Oh, no, sir.
Any matter, the first sentence says, any matter relating to the operation of the school system may be appealed to the board, period. Does that not, now I know all the other stuff that's added in, but does that, since that is the beginning sentence, does that not give anybody the right to, at some point, address the board, period? Whether they followed the procedure or not? No?
I think the however is significant. If you want to just end the policy on that first sentence, then I would say yes. But when the next word is however, it's the desire to solve it at the lowest possible level. It's just a statement. I guess ultimately anybody could come bring anything they want before the board, and the board's not, I don't think, going to close them down. But if you want to fix the problems, if you truly want to address the concerns, this is how we're going to handle it. And if we're not going to handle it that way, then we're not going to handle parent concerns that way, and we're going to have a system of chaos because it's never going to respond to issues. So, you know, it's any policy has black and white, and then it has gray. And I think, you know, it's just getting to what do we want. And what I want is a mechanism that as soon as a problem is identified, our system is respectful and responsive to it. It's disrespectful, I think, to any employee who says, I have a concern about something, and they never hear back from their next level supervisor. I think it's disrespectful.
So if they do not hear back, and we talked a little bit about this last month, I believe, if they do not hear back from their supervisor, then what should they do? Should they skip to the next level? Should they call their board member? Should they come to the board? What?
And this is where I think the procedure has to be abundantly clear. And I think an employee should be able to look up and say, what is my chain of command? And other systems I saw have this. This is who you go to. And yes, board members are in that chain of command.
It sounds great,
And it, it's
but
not
it could be a nightmare from the standpoint of trying. And it may not be. It may just, there may not be that many deals. It may all kind of work itself out, so to speak. But it could be a nightmare from a tracking standpoint to try to keep up with what if you had one person that was trying to track it and see that. And that's what we talked about a little bit last week.
I think, yeah, and I agree with you. I think it's the responsibility of the employee. And if an employee is going to say, I followed the chain of command, and they're going to then speak, I personally, if I were in that chair role, wouldn't make them prove it to me.
No.
But I would talk to them after and say, show me what you did, so I can go find out where the breakdown is. And if they chose not to, yeah, then I would address that with them. So I don't think, I was wrong in thinking that Terry could ask her, you got to trust the employee to say, but the employee needs to be able to go to a procedure and say, this is how I do this. This is the appropriate steps for me to take to get my concern resolved. I think the PLC is a good example that India gave. But it really is the same thing as the SAT-10. I do believe that a lot of teachers have talked to their principals about concerns they have. But I do also believe they talk to them when they're in staff meetings and when they're at the copy machine and when they're in the workroom or when they pass in the hallways. And for many, many reasons, they get forgotten. For the same reasons that when somebody shares a concern with me, I always try to end it with, would you mind following up with an email and just highlight those things? Don't give me the whole story again, because that acts as a reminder that I need to address your concern. So anything you want addressed, you really need to put in writing, because it says, I demand the respect of a response. And I really do believe that in PLCs, it would be the rare principal who would say, I agree with you, but I can't do anything about it. Even if they believe that, they're motivated then to go say, hey, are you guys having problems with these too? I think we give everybody an out when we choose not to respond in writing in an appropriate time frame, and that's why our problems are never addressed until they just get to the point where you can't take any more. And I think that's where we are as a system, and I think to continue to try to fix it by allowing it to happen the way it is does not address the root cause, which is we have a system that is not appropriately responsive to our employee concerns.
The principal or administrator may share their concern, but it may not be within their power to actually do anything about it. And as a result, like you said, it sort of gets lost and it leaves the employee even more frustrated, I would think, than they originally were. I guess my concern is that by us discussing this, I don't have any problem with following the chain of command on certain things, but I do not want the board to be perceived as not wanting concerns, not wanting, no matter whether it's a Knox County school employee, whether it's a parent, or whether it's a member of the public, if they have a concern about Knox County school operations, I want them to feel like they can come and talk to us for 5 minutes or less. And that, I think this may be, this may hurt that, is my greatest concern. Thank you.
Carson.
And I guess the thing I would say in response is, if this did no harm, in our willingness to let any parent or any employee come at any point and bring a concern, and it did no harm, I would agree 100%. But I think it can do harm. And I think, again, India's example was good. She said, in PLCs, because then I, as a board member, can then go say, because, the word she used, it was something like, everybody is upset about this and it's not working. And then she changed it to, well, a majority were. Well, we don't know that. But I will tell you that any parent who watches that, that is automatically the assumption they make. And if you look at a system that believes in service excellence, which is what it is to our employees as well as to our kids and our community, service excellence is the same here as it is in the hospitals that I work. When we went through training for that, and it took training, even though we were all professionals. But, we had this guy sit with us, and he said, you need to understand that to a parent, their child is their most valuable possession. And you are asking them, outside of their choice, to come to you when they're most vulnerable, and they turn over their child to you to take care of them. And we all knew that. He says, so how do you think it makes them feel when they're in the patient room and they're waiting to be seen and they hear the nurses in the hallway saying, oh, I didn't even get a break today because we're short 2 nurses. Do you think it makes them worry? Do you think it makes them feel safe? To me, there is no difference in a parent who turns over their child to us in public education. And so I don't want to paint a picture that hides concerns from parents. They have a right to know. But I think where we are going now, every concern they're hearing. And I think many of those can and should be addressed at a level where they're more quickly dealt with. And I think any principal that agrees with their staff that anything isn't good, PLCs, they either need to be, how do you get the expertise? We can hire, and I know the world differs on this, I can hire a superintendent who's been a classroom teacher for 40 years. But I have 4,000 teachers who have 40 years, a lot of them each, of classroom experience. If there's no way to have that experience influence decisions, putting somebody else there with that many years isn't going to change a thing. And so if that principal cannot represent that principal's clinical, educational experience and her staff's up the chain, then we got real problems. Now, it doesn't, then they, at the very least, will come back to the staff and say, I agreed with you. These are the reasons why. We have to be able to debate things based on reasons. And this system has to be able to defend decisions based on reasons, not just Dr. McIntyre wants to do it, which is what the answer I get, or they get all the time. So I don't know the perfect, but I will tell you, I think there is the potential to do harm right now.
Any more discussion on this? I think I'm not saying anything. All right. I'm trying to get back to, yes, and I'm not getting there. Just what's grants? 8A. Any questions or discussions on that? No. Oh, 8B.